Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending this Black Hat USA Analyst Summit session. My name is Tanner Johnson, and I'm a Principal Analyst for Data Security with Omdia. Encryption is fundamental to all data security efforts, but when it's used by an adversary to deny organizations access to their own data, the consequences can be devastating. Recent security incidents directed at critical infrastructure have resulted in United States DOJ and FBI elevating the severity of ransomware to be considered on par with terrorism. Ransomware gangs have evolved with ties to international criminal organizations, and nation-state sponsored actors worldwide have been tied to some of the most destructive attacks in recent years. In this presentation, I'll outline some of the challenges that organizations face in preparing for and responding to ransomware attacks. Additionally, I'll provide insight into some recommended data security best practices endorsed by various national security entities in order to help mitigate the hurdles of this dynamic threat. First, I'd like to provide a very brief summary of the history behind the development of ransomware as we know it, as well as its modern implications. Then we'll look at the overall evolution of the threat of ransomware. I'll look to discuss some of the response challenges plaguing many organizations. We'll also touch on the recent escalation of ransomware to parity with terrorism. And lastly, we'll discuss some general mitigation practices and conclusions prior to ending with Q&A. Ransomware itself is a relatively recent creation. Unfortunately, the idea of ransom is nothing new. This practice has been documented going back thousands of years. For example, Julius Caesar was even reported to have been captured and ransomed by pirates that he and his crew encountered while at sea. At their most reductive form, ransoms ultimately deny some targeted victim access to something it values in order to extort money for its supposed safe return to its rightful owners. Following the theft, the criminals typically provide the victim with some official notification, ransom note or so, outlining their various demands for the release of their hostage. However, the entire foundation of this felonious practice demands an unspoken agreement, an honor amongst thieves, if you will. This translates into a complex and difficult scenario where the very criminals who are denying a victim access to their own property must now also be entrusted to return that access in its entirety if and when the demands are met. This practice has been a lucrative criminal enterprise for several millennia, and that is the main reason it has evolved and adapted into the global data security scourge that exists today. Ransoms have historically been tied to physical items of value. In turn, such transactions have logistically required some form of physical interaction or exchange between the thief and the victim. This scenario introduces a level of risk to the thief, as any physical interaction comes with considerable opportunities for potential exposure. However, today's digitally connected world benefits the thief in two important ways. It has reduced the risk of the thief when accepting payment, as there's no longer a need for physical exchange. Additionally, thieves now have a worldwide pool of potential victims, as anyone, anywhere with an internet connection and something of value to ransom could be the next ransomware target. Unlike previous forms of ransom, in the digital age, criminals don't even necessarily need access to your assets in order to steal them. They can simply get away with denying legitimate access for everyone else. As we have evolved into a more information-driven society, so too has our dependence upon consistent and uninterrupted access to our own generated data. In the cybersecurity CIA holy trinity of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, each component is essential. However, availability can be the most crippling to any organization once it's been lost. To add insult to injury, the absolute urgency and panic system denial has created in victims has only exacerbated the severity of the challenge. Individuals are more likely to engage in decisions that get them back up and running the fastest, regardless of the potential consequences. And gaining unauthorized access to critical data has come to replace rare gems as the real crown jewels for would-be criminals in the 21st century. The first ever documented example of ransomware occurring was in 1989. Joseph Popp, an evolutionary biologist by trade, developed the AIDS Trojan, which was a crude virus designed to lock down a victim's computer, extort the user for payment in order to regain access to their systems. Popp created 20,000 diskettes labeled AIDS Information Introductory Diskettes and distributed them to fellow attendees of that year's World Health Organization's AIDS conference. Popp's malware encrypted file names and hid directories on infected computers, while notifying the victim that they would have to spend $189 and send a check to a company called PC Cyborg Corp with a Panamanian post office box in order to receive the decryption key and regain access to their locked systems. Ironically, Pop was deemed unfit to stand trial for his crimes, as he was a bit of an odd character, allegedly known to wear cardboard boxes on his head to shield himself from radiation. Despite its numerous limits in both function and scope, the proof of concept displayed from Pop's Age Trojan illustrated just how viable a medium malicious software offered as a means for reaching new potential victims. However, the challenges criminals had with regards to gaining access to larger pools of victims were slowly being negated as internet access became more readily available for most of the developed world. Advancements in broadband internet capabilities saw more reliable connections with greater speed, which in turn provided a platform that increased the reach of criminals exponentially. This also witnessed the development of more advanced screen locking tactics that severely limited user interaction while only providing details necessary for payment requirements. Pop's Age Trojan was a simple virus designed using symmetric cryptography. While it was far from sophisticated, it showed others what was possible. A host of ambitious cybercriminals realized Pop had only scratched the surface. His work led to the development of more sophisticated ransomware toolkits. These toolkits utilized far more advanced encryption algorithms and that proved far more difficult for victims to crack. For example, by deploying asymmetric cryptography, algorithms such as those offered through RSA, the increased private public key capabilities granted criminals with greater certainty that their respective targeted victims would not be able to reverse engineer a decryption key. It wasn't until the mid-2000s that the world witnessed first several flavors of ransomware in the wild. The Archivius Trojan was first documented, an instance of ransomware using RSA encryption. Discovered in the wild in 2006, this malware would encrypt the entire My Documents folder on any victim's Windows-based computer, ultimately requiring the victim to spend enough on purchases at an online pharmacy in order to receive the necessary decryption key. GP Code ransomware campaigns came to prominence the same year, taking a more nuanced approach by utilizing phishing techniques to conceal the malware and email attachments curated to appear as legitimate job offers. Like Archivius, the GP Code malware also encrypted the same My Documents Windows folder using an RSA public key and demanding payment to receive the decrypting private key. However, at this time, ransomware still operated in the shadows as various logistical complications and challenges that criminals needed to contend with to facilitate payment. The late 2000s saw the development of blockchain technology and the corresponding cryptocurrencies built upon it, which became the very catalyst needed for ransomware to enter the mainstream. With the advent of completely anonymous and untraceable payment technologies offered through cryptocurrencies, the entire criminal underworld's efforts behind ransomware attacks was thrown into overdrive. While the decentralized nature of Bitcoin increased its overall popularity, combined with its steady increase in value, this cryptocurrency became the preferred method for coordinating payment between criminal and victim. Despite Bitcoin helping criminals facilitate their financial transactions, it wasn't as easy for victims who likely lacked the knowledge needed to even begin acquiring Bitcoin. The campaigns became so sophisticated that criminals began establishing call centers to assist their victims in purchasing Bitcoin in order to pay their own ransom. Sadly, within the first 20 years of its use, sophisticated and orchestrated criminal ransomware campaigns were regularly making headlines. One of the first variants that gained both prominence and considerable profit was the CryptoLocker malware. Using 2048-bit RSA key pairs, the complexity of this algorithm ensured victims had no choice but to pay the $300 ransom associated with the malware. This ransomware attack had countless delivery mechanisms, which is one of the primary reasons it spread so rapidly. The CryptoLocker malware, utilized by the Game Over Zeus banking Trojan, took the lessons from Pop's Age Trojan and ran with it, instigating a ransomware field day nearly overnight. This attack was also resilient as it took a coordinated effort from the FBI, security researchers, and other national agencies to bring down the CryptoLocker Game Over Zeus botnet. The perceived success of CryptoLocker resulted in an absolute explosion of the number of ransomware variants encountered in the wild. With these developments, the evolution and monetization of ransomware as a service began to take shape. as criminals began offering customized, off-the-shelf ransomware toolkits. While already a troubling concept to consider, such an offering ultimately allowed for the fast and massive global proliferation of ransomware campaigns. Furthermore, individuals with little to no technical knowledge could now purchase their own ready-made ransomware applications. To make matters worse, without technical knowledge, the purchasers of these kits have no way of knowing whether the client's data was correctly encrypted or that their access was ever truly restored. This leaves many victims struggling as their access to their assets may still be hindered even after a ransom is paid. As they've had time to mature and evolve, modern ransomware have grown considerably in both severity and sophistication. Ransomware gangs have now begun coordinating with each other in efforts to bring down larger, more lucrative targets, a strategy being referred to as big game hunting. Larger targets like critical infrastructure already have a low tolerance for loss of availability with an hour of unscheduled disruption potentially costing millions. However, with larger targets comes greater opportunity for potential ransoms that aren't limited to availability. Many targeted companies have valuable intellectual property that is essential to their business operations. By confiscating and potentially threatening to release this data to the world if not paid, criminals are finding new ways to leverage data in a ransom. Unfortunately, the severity of the risks associated with ransomware have continuously been overlooked or even dismissed by organizations within every conceivable market since the inception of the threat itself. Our modern culture is often a reactionary one. We are usually unaware of various risks and threats until we ourselves are forced to deal with them. Additionally, security precautions can be expensive. Tight IT budgets often result in security precautions being the first on the chopping block. This issue is only exacerbated by COVID-19 as every market has suffered a loss of resources, which have already been stretched thin as a result of necessary lockdown responses to the pandemic. Going further, all security begins with visibility. You cannot possibly hope to protect what you are unaware even exists. If simply asked to identify where an organization's data is located, many security personnel would likely struggle to actually answer confidently. Between locally connected hardware components, various networked storage servers, integrated cloud or edge devices, on-premises, off-premises, hybrid cloud deployments, an organization's data can be housed in countless locations simultaneously, making effective visibility a Herculean effort. This evolving ecosystem systematically makes locating data assets a significant challenge. Despite the complexity of this initial task, no definitive information protection strategy can be implemented if the data assets themselves and their locations are not initially recognized. Organizations must discover, identify, and classify their respective data assets that are essential for business continuity, as data visibility is as essential as visibility for any other organizational asset. Often referred to as an organization's crown jewels, these are the mission-critical data assets and repositories that are crucial to a company's continued operation and would likely cause severe damage if compromised. However, it's likely that such knowledge is limited to a select group of senior executives within an organization. Comprehensive data classification is essential for any form of data governance to be effective. While properly labeling these assets is a separate challenge in and of itself, once a consensus surrounding the establishment of criteria for data assets labeling is achieved, the process begins by first tagging any located data according to these pre-approved characteristics. This data tagging makes the data itself easier to track and search. One of the additional benefits of this process is that duplication of data can be discovered and addressed more efficiently. Additionally, adversaries are capitalizing on the chaos from the pandemic to exploit even more potential vectors of compromise within an organization. While many modern enterprise environments have deployed multiple redundant and layered security solutions to protect their physical office locations from cyber threats, the near global transition towards remote working caused many organizations to lose whatever perimeter controls they once enjoyed, as the perimeter now includes the home networks for an entire remote workforce. As a result of this transition, the potential vectors of compromise have increased exponentially as well. While browser pop-ups, email attachments, malicious links, and suspicious files have typically been the delivery mechanism for ransomware, the attacker strategies are evolving. More attacks have sought to incorporate social engineering strategies designed to build trust with an organization's staff in order to gain access and to secure systems using the target's credentials. As ransomware groups are often out seeking high-value targets in order to receive the largest return on their investment, these various markets have traditionally focused on providing critical infrastructure like utilities, finance, and healthcare. Organizations operating within these industries already have mountains of unique and complex government-enforced compliance and policy requirements alone that they must adhere to. These requirements, or being in breach of them, add an even greater urgency, panic, and criticality to any attack that also threatens an additional government fine on top of the cost of the ransom itself. As recent events surrounding the threat of ransomware have been brought to the forefront of our collective consciousness, it has painted a stark picture for organizational preparedness worldwide. In a recent survey conducted by our colleagues at Dark Reading, respondents were asked to rate their own confidence level in their respective organization's ability to respond to a ransomware attack. Surprisingly, less than 1/4 of those who answered the survey said they were confident that their respective business operations would continue during an attack. Even more disturbing, 30% of those responding claimed they either had no response plan whatsoever or were entirely unsure whether a plan existed at all. Sadly, responses like these help to illustrate just how unprepared most organizations are to address the threat of ransomware. There are, of course, geopolitical implications to the rapid escalation in ransomware incidents. The government response to such security threats, however, has historically been methodical and slow. Despite plaguing the world since the turn of the 21st century, cyber risks have only recently been given greater priority in recent years from various government, defense, and military agencies. The demand for a substantive response capability had grown increasingly urgent given the escalating frequency of attempted or actual penetrations of the US government and military networks by various foreign powers. In addition to signing his own cybersecurity-related executive orders, in 2017, President Trump announced decisions to elevate the United States Cyber Command to the same operational status as other combatant commands like US Strategic Command or US Special Operations Command. The official elevation was done to help officially differentiate military operations, which are bound by international law, from espionage, which is largely omitted from national law. For example, NSA operations demand absolute secrecy as they are primarily focused on gaining access to networks for the collection of intelligence. However, US cybercom operations are likely to require actions that are conspicuous in nature, such as disrupting an adversary's communications networks. In the wake of several high-profile ransomware attacks directed at critical infrastructure, the US Department of Justice has chosen to elevate all ransomware investigations to be handled similarly to that of terrorism. In the face of sophisticated, organized, often nation-state-backed attack campaigns, even the most data protection-centric organizations with dedicated incident response teams and security operations centers will likely struggle to protect information from compromise and exfiltration. The Colonial pipeline ransomware attack was a catalyst that forced the world to witness firsthand just how crippling ransomware attacks are to the victim organization and how devastating successful attacks could threaten national security, especially when attacks are directed against critical infrastructure. Sadly, Colonial Pipeline announced that it had been actively trying to recruit a cybersecurity lead, but had not filled the role at the time of the attack. The implications of this attack are considerable, as it will grant organizations greater access to resources necessary to coordinate and respond to various threats. This action will require investigators and US attorneys to share pertinent intelligence on various cases, as well as necessary technical details with government officials. Such a move will also open the door for greater collaboration between private organizations and government agencies in order to more easily disrupt ransomware campaigns. In May of this year, the Biden administration signed an executive order designed to bolster the country's cyber defenses. Outlined in the policy guidelines, President Biden recognized that the United States faces persistent and sophisticated attacks that threaten the nation as a whole, and that the federal government must improve its efforts to identify, deter, protect against, detect, and respond to these actions and actors. The administration recognized the importance of removing many of the contractual barriers and restrictions that have historically hindered the sharing of cyber threat information between parties. The executive order provided additional requirements for modernizing cybersecurity within the federal government by adopting and deploying more advanced threat detection capabilities while working to respect privacy and civil liberties. Biden's executive order is a fundamental step in making our nation's cyber defenses more robust, but it also grants the administration greater options for organizing any potential response. The FBI claimed that the culprits in the Colonial pipeline attack, a ransomware network known as DarkSide, are a group based in Russia. However, there are growing concerns regarding any kind of official retaliation. As such, a cyber standoff could escalate into even more orchestrated attacks against the US, its interests, and its allies. As expected, Vladimir Putin has regularly dismissed accusations against Moscow as being unfounded and nonsensical. However, only time will tell if the geopolitical posturing between the two countries will result in a digital détente. As organizations continue to generate ever-increasing volumes of data, secure data management requires understanding how an organization's activities impact their own data footprints. As these data footprints increase in size, so too does the necessity to implement protective controls over every stage of the data's lifecycle, from creation to processing, storing, transmitting, and ultimately destroying. While advanced data security solutions can utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning to recommend specific policies based on observational patterns, the organization itself must dictate the specific policies by which its own data adheres to. As the number of attack vectors being utilized by adversaries is growing steadily, organizations must engage in their own due diligence when it comes to their security posture. Such vectors of potential infection include, but are not limited to, vulnerable internet-facing applications and systems, potential server misconfigurations, social engineering or phishing attacks on personnel, or precursor malware infections. Additionally, third parties and managed service providers need to be taken into consideration as what are they meeting their security obligations? What are their risk tolerances? When it comes to mitigating ransomware, preparation is key, as the chaos and panic created by the sudden denial of access to operational data requires a comprehensive and strategic approach, especially as there is no one-size-fits-all solution to any specific cyber threat across all industries. Any substantive protection and response efforts against the threat of ransomware must involve developing a comprehensive assessment of your own organization's security posture. As each individual organization is likely to have unique security requirements, priorities, and risk tolerances, it is essential that each entity develop a customized response plan to fit their respective needs. Such strategies have traditionally come in the form of an organizational business continuity plan designed to provide guidance for keeping the business operational during a potentially disruptive incident. One of the primary components of a business continuity plan should be a disaster recovery plan, which further outlines specific steps, procedures, and responsibilities that need to be adhered to in the event of a catastrophic incident. While initially developed to address things like natural disasters, disaster recovery plans can easily be modified to help organizations address evolving cyber threats. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has provided an official ransomware guide to assist organizations with their respective mitigation efforts. This guidance outlines the importance of being prepared for such an attack. A part of this preparation should be the establishment of a comprehensive data lifecycle management strategy. It's one of the strongest countermeasures against ransomware. Organizations need to securely encrypt and back up their gold images of their critical operational data and do so offline in order to mitigate exposure. Regularly verify and update gold images of your critical systems and make sure they are available for system restoral should it be required. The CISA also outlines the importance of being prepared for an attack by actively planning for one by developing a cyber incident response plan, which can be integrated into any business continuity or disaster recovery plans. CISA further highlighted some of the general best practices to help reduce the opportunities for compromise. Conduct regular audits in order to discover any security gaps that need addressing. Have an asset management and inventory management solution. Ensure network segmentation and that multi-factor authentication is deployed whenever available. Conduct regular patching, scanning, and auditing of various connected components. Enact the principle of least privilege amongst personnel. and utilize the native security capabilities within applications being used. Lastly, the CISA also has released a ransomware readiness assessment module for its cybersecurity evaluation tool. This assessment is a self-assessment security tool that organizations can utilize to gain insight into how prepared their cyber defenses are to handle a potential attack. Another dark reading survey was conducted that asked which of the following data security related incidents are your top concerns, and respondents were allowed to choose 3. Out of 800 responses, more than 65% answered that ransomware was one of their primary perceived threats. While other choices offered in the survey have equally devastating capabilities, the extortionary component of ransomware adds further insult to injury. Despite these very visible concerns, many organizations continue to dismiss the threat posed by modern-day, sophisticated, orchestrated, often nation-state backed, and easily accessible ransomware attacks. Unfortunately, while security personnel are likely more than aware of the evolving threats and their own respective organizations face, many in leadership holding the purse strings likely still need convincing. Criminals, especially adversarial hackers, are unlikely to discriminate on potential targets for a quick buck. There is an ever-growing variety of ransomware strains being discovered in the wild by researchers daily. Combined with dynamic environments, potential infection vectors, along with advanced command and control botnets orchestrating sophisticated automated attack campaigns, the reality is every organization that operates in the digital world is at risk. Now, should you ever fall victim to a ransomware attack, there are some immediate steps that can be taken to mitigate your infection and expedite your recovery. It's imperative that compromised systems be quarantined immediately in order to reduce exposure. Such an effort requires comprehensive network segmentation to expedite the isolation of the threat. Having access to offline backup equipment available in the event of these needing to replace their compromised components, as well as your golden images, could help facilitate a faster recovery. Follow your cyber incident response plans that outline universal response priorities, procedures, and policies. If you're one of the few organizations that hasn't matured to the level of developing a comprehensive cyber incident response plan, you should begin this process immediately. If ultimately you feel you have no other recourse than to comply with your data captor's demands and pay the ransom, there are several factors to consider. There is no guarantee an organization will regain complete, partial, or even limited access to their ransom data. Sadly, there are many victims who have paid their ransom only to be denied the corresponding decryption key. Lastly, once you pay a ransom, you are far more likely to be whitelisted as a potential future target to revisit later on. Lastly, the continued survival of any organization or business cannot be left dependent upon the positive fallout from negotiating with a criminal. Each individual organization must take active measures for ensuring its own ransomware resilience. This can be further facilitated and expedited by coordinating with a growing repository of more readily available government resources. On behalf of all of us at Omdia, I'd like to thank you for attending this Black Hat Analyst Summit, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Take care.